In this video, I'm going to show you how to use a pattern to create an effect on a shape and how to apply a color below the pattern to get a more subtle effect than if you just use the pattern itself. And then I'm going to show you how to use a shape to create your very own patterns that are customized to what you would like them to be. Let's get started. So first we're going to add a pattern to this dog image here, and I'm going to show you how to apply the pattern, and then I'm going to show you how to make a nice effect with multiple colors and the pattern. So the first thing you want to do is select the object that you're going to pattern, and in this case the dog. And then if you go under your swatches by double clicking on the fill color, you should see some patterns in there. Okay, but you can find a lot more patterns if you look under the pattern libraries. So if you go into your swatch libraries and look down, you'll see patterns. So I'm going to just choose a simple pattern for this tutorial. Under basic graphics, I'm going to choose basic graphics dots. And what that does is that will open a window that shows you a bunch of dot patterns. And just by clicking on these patterns, I'll apply a pattern of dots to the dog. Okay, so there are several different types of dot patterns in black and white. And so I'm just going to choose one that I like. This one seems to be sized pretty reasonably in comparison to the dog. So if you want to add those patterns to your swatches, you can take your swatch window and you can drag any of them. So if I want to drag this one, for example, I can drag and drop it into my swatch window and it will add it at the end. Okay, and then any one that you apply is going to be listed among the recent patterns at the end there. Okay, so now I've added a pattern to this dog. That was pretty simple, but I'd like to show you that you can make a more interesting presentation of the pattern if you layer it with a color. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to duplicate the dog, and there are various ways to do that. On PC, I'm holding down Alt key and then dragging the dog away from itself, and that copies it. You can copy and paste. I think on the Mac, you hold down the Option key and then drag a copy of the dog away from itself. So in this version of the dog, I'd like to give it a color. So I'm going to click my fill again, and let's give it, I don't know, sort of a orange yellow color. I'm going to double click. I'm actually going to use the color mixer, and I'm going to set it to HSB so I have a little bit more control, and I'll give it something, I don't know, something that to me looks a little bit more like a golden retriever color. That's okay. Well, that's halfway decent. All right. Okay, so if I drag this dog over the other dog, you're going to see that, the dog eclipses the earlier copy. So I would like to send this dog behind the earlier copy. So under Arrange, I'm going to send it to back. And now when I drag it, you'll be able to see the earlier dot copy. And if I want them to be perfectly aligned, I can select both and go under Object Align, Vertical Align Center, and Object Align, Horizontal Align Center, and I know they'll be perfectly lined up. Okay, if I look at my layers menu, I'll now see that I have 3 objects in this layer, and this is where it becomes useful to use the layers menu to select specific things. I want to mess with the pattern that I overlaid on top of the color. So I can go to this pattern in the layer menu and click the little circle here, and it will select just that pattern. So it's easier than trying to select it by dragging. All right, so now that pattern is selected, I'm going to go back to Properties, and I'm going to go to Fill, or actually I'm going to go to Opacity here. So you've seen before that we can make things more or less opaque. Now, looks like what I'm doing here is making the color transparent, so you can fade it out if you wanted to, but that's not what I want to do. Actually, I want to go to back to the Layers menu. I don't want to target the colorful dog shape. I want to target the pattern, the dog pattern. So I'm going to click this circle that's, I can tell which one it is, but I wasn't paying attention before. I want to target the black and white one. Okay, so if I go back under properties and I choose opacity, I can tell I targeted the right one because you can see that the dots are fading out as I do this. So one way to make an interesting pattern that involves color is I could just fade the dots out. So you could have like slightly dark dots over your golden retriever shape, and then you can get this effect. Or if you click on opacity, you'll see some options here that include changing the opacity directly, but also changing the way this pattern combines with the things that are below it. So in black and white images, some of these combinations are pretty simple. Like for instance, normal just shows you the black dots. And then, but you have a bunch of other choices like overlay, soft light, hard light gives you the same dots back. Difference will do kind of a subtraction, so you'll get different colors. You should experiment with these. What I'm going to do is I'm going to choose soft light, and then I'm going to play with the opacity to get just a subtle image of that pattern on the dog. So at this point, I'm going to do something to make this a little bit more interesting. I'm going to change the color of the dog to be a gradient. So I'm going to target that particular shape, which is the dog that is colored in, and I'm going to open the gradient window, or the gradient, yeah, it's the gradient window. So go under and choose gradients. Now I'm going to create a new gradient. So I've got this color here, and what I'd like to do is have a radial gradient. So I'm going to click on radial gradient there, and then I'm going to change one of the colors here by double clicking on it to a color similar to the gradient that I had before. So, or I should color similar to the color I had before. Okay, so here's an orange, that orange that I had, and I can go back under HSB and I can change it. I can make it a little bit more yellow. Okay. Anyway, I could play with that to get the exact color that I like. Okay, now here's the gradient. Now it's applied to the dog. If I would prefer it to not go to white and I just kind of want a subtle effect, what I can do is I can edit this white to be more like the color, the other color that I have. So I can go into here and then change it and increase the lightness, and so not make it white, but also keep that color. It gives kind of a nice little complex effect on that dog. One more thing I'd like to show you for this pattern. So I'm going to close the gradient window and I'm going to select the pattern layer again. I should say the pattern shape. And now under Object, I'm going to choose Transform Scale. And so you get a window that comes up with this. I'm going to put it back to 100%. There's a preview on, so you get 100%. 100% will be no change to the scale. So I'm going to show you that this pattern has a certain scale itself, and some of the options in the scaling window will let you change the scale of the pattern or the scale of the object. So if I turn off all the options here, so right now I only had transform objects on. When I try to turn that off, it turns on transform patterns. And so now what I'm doing is scaling the pattern itself, not the image, not the object. So let's say I want to make this pattern larger. I can blow it up to 200%. And the preview will show me what that will create. 500% makes it much larger. See? So you get these big dots. Or perhaps I would like it to be tighter. I'm going to make it 50% and you get a tighter dot pattern. Okay, and that's actually a little bit nicer. It gives it a little bit of texture, and let's say that was what I was looking for. I can click OK, and now I have my pattern at the size that I wanted, and with this subtle effect. And that's how to apply a simple pattern to an object. In the second part of this video, I'd like to show you how you create your own custom pattern. So first, what you're going to need to do is create the objects that are part of your pattern, and I'm going to give you we're going to create a fairly simple pattern, so I don't want it to be too complicated. So I'm going to use the shape tool to create a star, and that will be the basis of my pattern. You can see that I still have patterns set up to fill on that star. Let's give the star a color. Let's start with, let's make some blue stars. Okay, so there's a blue star, and now, now I can edit this star however I like in order to get the shape that I want. So of course you can scale the star, and you can change how pointy it is. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it like this. This is my example star for my pattern. All right, so in order to create a pattern, you're going to go under the pattern options, and the 3-line menu has a choice called make pattern. And so we're going to create a pattern by doing make pattern. But the first, what we need to do is we need to select our object that we want to make the pattern out of. So we're only making this pattern out of a single object, so we'll select it, and then I'll say make pattern, and it warns me that it's been added to the panel. Okay, so pattern has been created, and then it gives me a preview of the pattern. Okay, so there are a few options here that you can play with that will change how the pattern repeats. So this is a grid option, and the grid option just puts one star in each grid location. I can choose brick by row, and then what it will do is it will offset each row so that you get an alternating pattern. Brick by column does the same thing but with the columns, and then you can also play with how much it offsets. So in order to understand what these options do, I suggest that you would play around with them. So one of the other things that you can do here is you can directly edit how far these stars are apart from each other in your pattern. If you click this box here, then you will get an editable box around your star. And what happens is you can change how much of the background it captures as it repeats the pattern. In other words, now it's considering not just the object part of the pattern, but some of this white space as well. So you're adding white space into the pattern, and it's repeating that white space. You can even make the repeating area smaller, in which case it will start to jam these stars together like this. Okay. So in addition to that, you can change how the pattern appears in its overlaps. So if I choose, for example, bottom in front and left in front, it's going to make the stars that are to the left and below appear above the stars that are to the right and above. Okay, so you can see that here with the points of the star. This star is below this star, and so this point appears above, and this star is above this star, and so its point appears above, but these on the bottom are below because they are on top of and to the right in this case. All right, when you're done editing your pattern, you can click Done here. And it doesn't look like anything happened, and that's because the pattern is now a part of my swatches. And you can see the effect of that if you click an object and then choose the pattern to use as a fill. So to go back to editing the pattern, if I double click on it, I immediately go back into pattern editing, and what you can see is that the overlapping looks different here than it did when I applied the pattern because the editor automatically dims the other copies of the star. Okay, so this is not an accurate representation of what you're going to get when you choose the pattern to use. You have to imagine that these stars are going to be all the same color. So the effect that I got was different from what I wanted. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to click this button again in order to space these stars out more so that they don't look so jammed together in the final pattern. I do want them to be close, but I don't want them to be completely jammed together. This is better. Okay, that edited the pattern. And then again, I'm going to click Done to save the changes that I made to the pattern. Okay, it doesn't look really easy to see the pattern here on this object right now, and so we're going to apply something that we learned earlier, which is to scale this pattern to make it much tighter, and so it doesn't actually become a feature of the shape that we're looking at. Instead, it becomes a pattern that we can just see. So I'm going to go under Object. Actually, to do this, I need to select the object. So Object, Transform, Scale. And remember, I'm going to turn off Transform Objects because I only want to scale the pattern. And then I'm going to try some different sizes to see what works. So if you hit Return, it will finalize that change. If you just want to view it in the editor, what you need to do is, if you just want to see the preview, you need to put the percentage here and then just click somewhere else. So this was about 30%. Actually, this was 30. That was 30% on 30%. So that's 10% of the original. So that looks actually kind of nice. So I'm going to leave it at, what was that? That was 30. And I'm just going to say OK. And now I can add, let's see, add a stroke just so that it shows up a little bit better. And now you can see that I have a pattern applied to my object and a pattern that I created with this star here. And you can have any combination of shapes that you want to become part of a pattern. I just used a simple example by using one shape to show you that you could create this pattern over here. Once you're done with this object that you used to create the pattern, you no longer need it, and so you can just delete it because it was only useful for creating the pattern, and your pattern is here in your swatches, and so you're all set.